Welcome back, guys. I have no idea how we're going to top the last episode because not only did I love the way that it came out, clearly you guys did too. I cannot thank you enough for all of the feedback. Thank you to all of the new subscribers, and thank you guys for just helping this channel continue to grow and finding even more and more of an audience that's enjoying the content that I'm putting together. I really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. Now, if you somehow missed the last episode, I got a Liberty Walk body kit from Japan for the 308, and it's amazing. I am stoked on it. It looks incredible. The fitment is awesome. Can't be beat. Second to none. And today we are going to get started installing it, but I'm going to preface that by saying I'm going to go slowly on this one. I don't want to rush it. I want to make sure that the install comes out perfectly. I do not want to get to the finish line and say, oh, I wish I spent a little bit more time here or there. I wish this was straighter, that kind of stuff. Overfenders can be really easy to install, but if you want to do it right, it takes some time. So if you're looking for some sort of slam it on there, we're going to rivet this thing on, just cut the fenders right off and be done with it like that, this install is not it. I'm going to take my time. I want this thing to be perfect. We're going to start today by getting some holes drilled in the fenders, get holes drilled in the car, set some Rivnuts, and kind of just go over the proper way to do all that kind of stuff. And then next week, we're going to get out some saw blades and some cutoff wheels and actually cut the fenders off of the car. Before we dive in today, real quick, we'll talk some tools because I got something new. Now, if you've been paying attention to the table I've been working on for the last number of weeks, it's an 1/8" piece of sheet metal laid across a pair of plastic sawhorses. And to call this an inefficient welding table is an understatement. It's what I've got and it works, but it's far from great and it's very difficult to move around. It won't support very much weight. It's just altogether not the way to do things, especially as I'm continuing to try to improve my TIG welding skills. I need a welding table to really practice on. So this table is going in the dumpster, and in its place is going to be a Certiflat welding table. A few weeks ago I placed an order for a 2x4 foot table, and what showed up is a build-it-yourself kit that they say is guaranteed to be a perfectly flat work surface once you've put it together. And that's pretty cool considering the entire thing is made of 3/8 thick steel. If you notice underneath, there is a very serious lattice structure, and if you follow the instructions to weld it together and work hard not to warp anything, it'll wind up yielding you with this. An incredible welding table that's covered in holes so that you can mount all sorts of fixtures, tools, and clamps to it that'll really allow you to stretch your legs in fabrication and welding. I've also opted for a small side table that will hold my vise and a small holder for a pair of angle grinders so I can have one with a cutoff wheel and one with a flap wheel always at the ready. Now, I don't have any clamps for this thing yet, so I can't demonstrate them, but I'm excited to really put this thing to use a whole lot in some future episodes. Clearly, I'm excited about a table, but tables are only so exciting, so we'll get on over to the car. And it looks like Khalil is showing up just in time to lend a hand. And as said, we are going to start with the rear driver's side flare. My plan is to mock this one up in today's episode and kind of show the whole process for how we're going to do it, because the process is going to be the same for all four corners. There's no reason to do it 4 times over. We'll get one done and you can use your imagination for the rest. So let's go on and take this thing and drill it, because we got to get some holes put in this thing, and that's independent of anything else. Now, when I say putting holes in these fender flares, you'll notice that the pockets for the hardware are not drilled. Why they're not drilled is probably anybody's guess, but it's really not too big of a deal. We're just going to drill our own holes using an 1/8" drill bit for a nice small starter. Now, in order to find center on these, it's all down to the eyeball. I'm using one of the supplied washers from Liberty Walk and just kind of pinpointing the center. I've decided not to sink the washer all the way down in the pocket. I'm aiming instead for just kind of a middle ground, what I think will look best when the whole kit is installed. It's important to take your time if you have to do this step, because it's pretty hard to put fiberglass back into a hole once you drill it. To actually drill the holes, Khalil and I rigged up the drill cam, which is the GoPro zip tied to the top of the drill. And honestly, it didn't really work very well, but it was a fun bit of creativity. For drilling the holes, it's just a matter of going slow and steady, making sure the drill bit doesn't walk around on the relatively slick fiberglass. With our holes drilled, it's time to transfer those holes over to the car. So I had Khalil get out the painter's tape and start laying it down. This is to give us something to actually write on. And while protecting the paint is important, if you aren't repainting your car, I'm not too worried about that aspect of it here. I just need a surface to write on so that I can trace the holes that we just drilled with a fine-tipped pen. It's important to make sure that everything is really accurate on this step. You're going to wind up with Rivnuts that don't work and don't line up. That'll be a big problem if you have to go back and fix it. Now comes the process of actually test fitting the part one final time, making sure that our holes are going to be in their final locations. And you can see here that we're pretty close, although I did get out a file and modify the tabs that go into the belt line of the car a little bit more. And even now, they probably still need a bit more modification, but we're close enough to make this work. In order to get through the 1/8-inch holes that I drilled, I wound up pulling the ink cartridge out of a ballpoint pen, and it worked pretty well. Not entirely perfect, but absolutely close enough for this job. And a little bit more massaging there. And finally comes the moment of truth, actually drilling a hole through the quarter panel of a 1981 Ferrari. And to say that it's nerve-wracking is trivializing it, to say the least. All right, so up next we need to drill the holes for our Rivnuts. I went out and picked up these M5 ones that should do the trick really well, and they pair well with our Rivnut gun. But if you don't have one of these, I'm gonna get out a hand Rivnut tool and show you how to use that as well, because this isn't something everybody needs. It's a little bit overkill. To drill the holes, we're gonna use just a standard step bit. The second step on this is perfectly sized. And then last but not least, I found this at the hardware store. I can't tell you if it's any good. I haven't used it before, but it is a rust-preventing direct-to-metal enamel paint that is yellow. So we're gonna put this in the cap. We'll spray it directly in the cap, and then use a small paintbrush and paint the insides of the holes for the Rivnuts so we don't get rust later on down the road. The next step is taking our stepped bit and opening up our holes so that our Rivnuts will fit into place. All right, we've got all our holes drilled, and this is where probably most shade tree installations would move towards putting Rivnuts in, or probably just riveting the parts in. However, I want to take things an extra step, because if you look closely at the edges of these holes, we've got some kind of paint fracturing from the drill bit, and that's going to introduce rust later down the road, and we really don't want that. So what we're going to do is we are going to mask this stuff off, sand it down, and put some rust preventative enamel on it so that rust does not form in the future. Even though we're going to be repainting the car, we do not want to leave that underneath a Rivnut. With everything masked off, I've gotten out the DA and some light, fine sandpaper and have just buzzed over the holes to feather the edges. That's the main goal here, to make sure that none of the paint is able to lift in the future. After the first round of sanding, I peeled all of my tape off and actually went back and did it by hand because I really wanted to make sure that I had enough surface area around them buzzed down. This was a little bit stressful, but in the end worked out just fine. Probably not the approved method by most paint guys, but it'll work for now. Then I took our yellow enamel rust preventative, sprayed it into the cap, and came and did several coats over our holes, slowly but surely making sure it built up and completely covered the bare metal. I painted the inside of the well as well to make sure that any exposed metal is not going to rust. That last bit is important in any Rivnut installation because the edges of the holes that you drilled will be bare metal and you need to coat them with something, because even if every other aspect of your paint is perfect, it will introduce rust far down the road. Now, this isn't perfect. This paint job wouldn't work on the exterior of the car, but fortunately this is covered by our flare, and our only goal is to prevent rust in the future and to prevent the paint from lifting anywhere else, which is why we feathered the edges. So I think this solution is going to work really well. It's what was advised by my paint guy. And now, once this stuff's dry, we can go in and sink the Rivnuts into place. Now, like I said, I don't expect everybody to have a full-size Rivnut gun like this, and that's why I want to show you guys quickly a hand Rivnut tool, because they are just as effective and useful. It's essentially a giant pair of pliers, but it works in the same way. A Rivnut gets threaded onto the end mandrel here, and then when you compress the handles of it, it draws it back and collapses the Rivnut. And while they can be somewhat complicated to use if you're not careful, since you have so much leverage when you're on your sheet metal, if you wiggle up and down or side to side, you can distort the material due to the kind of length of the arm you have. Other than that, they're really simple. They work really well. You don't need an expensive tool to do that. These things are only, 40 or 50 bucks for a full set on Amazon. With that said, I'm not going to miss an opportunity to use my new Rivnut gun, so here we go. This thing really does make this entire job really easy, and if you use Rivnuts with any regularity, I highly, highly recommend one. From there, Khalil and I took the Fender and fit it to the car for the final time, at least for this stage of the project. And I'm happy to say that all of the hardware lined up, all of the Rivnuts were correct, the holes lined up, everything came into place wonderfully, and I'm quite happy with the outcome. And there we have it, guys. One fender completely bolted on. Fits up real nicely. There's a few things we'll have to adjust. There's a little bit of shaping that'll have to happen, some kind of sanding on the back edge of it to make it made up to the body perfectly now that it's all sunk down. But really, this is pretty good, and it would work very well with the rubber gasket in place. It would take up any of the kind of gaps that we see here. So overall, really happy with it. The method worked out well. We've got rust prevention. It's very securely fastened. It's certainly not going anywhere. And the only other kind of tidbit is that some of the fasteners don't sit flush due to the fact that the fender flare and the panel are not at the same angle. But I might custom machine some slanted washers to go in there to account for that and make it sit up better. So that's one corner finished up, and I'm hopeful that those instructions were helpful for some of you guys who are wondering how you get to this point. What comes next on this particular corner is going to be to go back in and cut the inner sheet metal out so that we can actually fit a big tire on the car. But as I said, I'm going to do that over the weekend and take my time with it because there's no coming back from that. That's going to be nerve-wracking to do. I'm also going to get the other 4 fenders bolted on over the weekend, so we've got a lot of stuff coming for Tuesday's episode, so make sure you guys come back and check it out. It should be pretty exciting. We are definitely hacking this car up more than we ever have before. I'm nervous about it. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for commenting, for subscribing, all of that stuff. I love the participation. I'm glad you guys are here for the build. I'll catch you guys on Tuesday.